Cities of the Future. We have 4 panelists. 2 of them you've met. And I'm going to time this perfectly so they have a place to sit as they come on. So you've met some of the people from National Geographic. You're about to meet the senior environmental editor for the magazine, Rob Kunzig. Welcome, sir. You're in the far end once the chair comes. Just wait patiently until it's there. We have Clarence Anthony, who's the executive director of the National League of Cities. Clarence, welcome. How are you, sir?
Thank you.
You have met Dr. Leyla Acaroglu. Here she is again. Is that a PhD? That's cool. And Andrew Winston, where have you been, man? It's been so long. So we're talking about the future of cities. Future is a relative term. We could be talking about 5 years from now, 100. Cities is a relative term. We could be talking about suburb or hut or sprawl. Rob, you edited the cover story of you wrote the cover story for the April issue of National Geographic about cities. Give us a sneak preview.
Still dotting the commas, even dotting the I's even now. But yeah, so the future of cities, well, the first thing I think to be said about that is that cities globally are going to grow. We've all heard that we're more than 50% urban right now, and by 2050 we're going to be 70% urban is the latest projection, I think. China moved 500 million people into cities in the last 30 or 40 years, and the government's current expectation is that another 300 million are going to move in China alone by 2030. So the way we design our cities is going to largely determine what our footprint on the
Do we
planet
really
is.
design our cities?
Well,
I thought they just kind of grow.
It's sort of a push and pull between those two tendencies, but there is a discipline of urban design, and the strange thing about it is that its origins in the 20th century really lay in a sort of deep antipathy to cities. The first urban designers were people who were trying to get out of cities. There was a guy named Ebenezer Howard in London in the 19th century who lived there at a time when London still had cholera epidemics and people lived 10 to a room and had pigs in their basement, and he dreamed of a house out in the country with maybe a lawn tennis court, as he wrote to his wife. And so he conceived of this idea of garden cities, and that then became the sort of the ideological basis for suburbia today.
Right, and Manhattan.
And
New York City, that was a pretty good design.
That's right.
Seems to have held up.
Yeah.
So Clarence, tell us what this League of Cities is. What is it?
So the National League of Cities is located in Washington, D.C. We are the voice for cities in America, the 19,000 cities, towns, and villages around public policy, around best practices, also providing training to elected officials on issues that are going to help them solve whatever issue they're dealing with, because most elected officials run for office because they want to improve their city, not because not all went to college just to become an elected.
So a couple of you have touched on the power of not the government, right? Businesses and colleges and cities making their voices heard. I mean, this thing about the Paris Accord is really, as you said, bizarre. I mean, that we are overriding our national answer to that accord. So does it matter what the government and the president have said? I mean, it used to be they were the power. Does it matter, or are we just going to trample right over what they've decreed?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
All right, so my work is with companies. I believe we have to, that companies are going to be an enormous part of the solution. But let's be clear, something the scale of climate, this is what government is made for. I mean, this is why we have, democratic or republic governments. We need things at scale. Companies can do a lot of it, but if you want a price on carbon, if you want to, put a price on the thing that we want less of, that has to come from the government. The government sets the rules. They set the playing field, and then the companies can compete about who does it best and who solves the problem best. But there's no way to do this just from the private sector. It's impossible.
Well, you might be the right person to answer this, but this is open to anyone. I thought 10 or 15 years ago, people were saying that renewable energy was a business opportunity. It was a way to make money. So in my oversimplified Cleveland boy brain, I thought the reason Republicans and conservatives would like to dismantle environmental regulation is because it costs businesses money. And we value businesses more than the environment. So explain how to justify, how to reconcile those two things, that a cleaner world is a good business opportunity and that a dirty world is a better business opportunity.
Well, I'll say something quickly, and then I'm sure you have something, but it comes back, Leyla talked about externalities. The reason there's a disconnect in what you just said is because business can externalize, meaning the Clean Air Act is the most profitable law in human history. From a perspective of society, it saves hundreds of billions of dollars a year in human health. That is not in the books of the companies, right? They may have to put scrubbers on and spend more money in their business, but the benefit to society is vast. There is no better payoff than air quality laws. That's because companies can externalize their costs, and those laws actually internalize them. They actually bring the cost into the business. But yes, are there opportunities to be the company that provides the scrubbers, the companies that build renewables? Renewables are now bigger than fossil fuels in terms of people and in terms of all new energy being built. We are net shutting down coal, right? So the business is going to renewables. It is going to the clean economy. It's going very quickly. So yes, it's good for business. But we also have to recognize that business lasted for 100 years, being able to externalize their costs onto society and not have to pay for any of that cost, which is what you were saying earlier.
So,
well, can I add to that? Because
no, I want him.
Dave, nope, I'm done. Okay.
Yeah, please do.
We're going to talk some trash here this afternoon. Let me just say this.
At a waste conference?
Let's just go for it.
You really wanted to bring that to the table.
I got to tell you, on your first question, local leaders are not waiting on Washington, D.C. or any other level of government.
That's right.
City leaders are leading. And they have to, because their citizens are demanding these solutions. You know, there's a co-benefit concept here that, you know, it is good for the environment, but it's also good for the community. Why is it good for the community? It is a moneymaker because we're looking from a city's perspective of how do we create the jobs for the future, not for just today. And the millennials and the other citizens in our communities are saying that in order for us to be prepared for this sustainable, resilient community, we have to get our kids educated on what those new jobs will be. We have to get our employees as well ready for those new industries. But we also recognize we have to attract the type of companies that are going to create those jobs that are sustainable. That may replace some of our employees through more efficient, effective ways. However, there are two types of cities. There are those cities that are ready, that are investing in sustainability departments, that are creating all types of technologies that can help them in that way. But there's also the mid and small size cities that can't make that investment. And that's the area that I think the real partnership between public and private can happen. And I think that companies like Waste Management, looking at your over 6,500 clients, should really, not think the impossible? I'm a Mick fan from now on. I mean, I'm going to use his stuff everywhere I speak from now on. But I just think that that's where, if we really are committed to doing something for our nation and our cities, that's the population that I think and size of cities that we really should focus on. The San Franciscos, the New Yorks, Chicagos, they can afford to pay for the investments for the economy of the future. Those mid-sized communities are where our opportunities are.
I see. Yes, sir?
Yeah, if I could jump in after that, I think, and to quote Mick again, my personal absurdity is that most of us live in cities that were not really designed for us, but were designed for cars. And that's a legacy of this planning ideology I was talking about earlier, that we deliberately at a certain point, a century ago, allowed the structure of our cities to be taken over by the needs of the car. And so now we have this built legacy that we have to deal with, and I think that's a tremendous challenge for cities, but it's also right at this point in time. And we're right here in Phoenix, a few miles down the road, a very important experiment is going on where Waymo is trying out their automated vehicles, and they just last month started offering taxi service. And that technology is coming, and the question of whether it's going to explode our cities again like the original car did and make them sprawl even more, or whether it's going to be harnessed in such a way that makes cities more compact, dense, people-friendly, and climate-friendly. That I think is a place where local governments maybe have a chance to play a big role.
Oh, just wait till Elon Musk starts drilling tunnels under our cities, the Boring Company. So, Leyla, what are some of the examples? What are some examples of the circular life cycle? First of all, in terms of consumer goods or anything, and secondly, does any of this apply to cities?
Yeah, well, I mean, cities essentially are an ecosystem, some more functional than others. And like any ecosystem, you get out what you put in, right? So if you put in effective, well-planned structures, services, dignity-based jobs, walkable cities, public transport that makes it equitable for people to move themselves around, all of these kinds of things, you get a particular type of culture. Right? And we can identify those cultures. Those of us who have had the fortune to be in many different cities around the world, they're different. And they're different because they have like a DNA that is the result of what goes into them. So then ultimately, you know, that is a design thing, and we can always retrofit, and we're reconstructing our cities regularly. Of course, some built infrastructure, it's like grandfathered in, right? Like there are parts of New York and San Francisco that are not going to go away. But the way in which people use the city, the way in which the mayors or the city officials encourage activities, there's this classic example of Oklahoma's mayor who made this challenge to reduce the obesity rate there, which was very car-driven, very fast food, driving kind of situation. Lots and lots of obesity. So he made this challenge. He gamified weight loss, 1 million pound challenge. And he basically not only set a challenge, but built the infrastructure to support exercise, walkable cities, to change the behaviors that were reinforcing the personal unsustainability. There are countless studies that talk about, you talk to the health benefits, but like if people walk a few minutes a day not just getting out of the car, even if it's automated or not, the health benefits, the cardiovascular benefits. You know that one of the biggest killers in the world after air pollution is loneliness? It's not a joke. All the associated emotions and illnesses of loneliness, of being isolated, is one of the worst killers that we have in our society. So if you look at it, air pollution and loneliness are the two biggest killers, and part of those are design problems. You know, the infrastructure, not having the right scrubbers or decisions around what is allowed to be produced and how it's produced. And then, of course, how we structure our cities that ultimately make them more friendly or less and more alienated. And I do think that living in cities where a car will drive up to your door and take you somewhere, it's fantastic when you're a little drunk, but not great if you want to meet people, if you want to have like a little bit of exercise, forced exercise, walk to the subway station, walk from the subway station up to the street. Believe it or not, those few minutes a day can prolong people's lives. So for me, it's like you got to look at the whole system, and you got to look at the way people use the system and how you can maximize the behavioral gains that you want based on what you put into the system. It's a system a lot then.
Well, here's a question that touches design and climate change and cities and design of cities. As climate change heats up, as you know, I am, what? Cynical and depressed. So I'm not totally convinced we're going to stop climate change doomsday as predicted. I think we...
Did I sound like I thought we were going to?
No, you sound like an optimist.
I told you.
But one thing that I find really weird is nobody, I was trying to write a novel, a futuristic novel set 150 years in the future, and I was like, what will cities be like when the coastal cities are flooded? Like, what do you do with Manhattan buildings? You just declare the first story of every building sacrificed to the rowboats?
Yeah, heaps of cities have whole elevated streets. You would walk down a city, and it used to be that the whole street was 2 meters below.
Yeah.
But then they just built over.
Where is this?
A lot of this, I think Chicago. I don't know off the top of my head, but some of them, it was all about septic systems and how they built that. Some of them was sea levels. So these are things that humans have been responding to for a long time. But to be honest, the best thing about Manhattan is oysters. I don't know if you guys know about this, but there's like a couple interventions you could put in to protect storm surges affecting Manhattan. And one of them is oysters, because Manhattan used to have like millions of giant oysters, and then people like oysters, there's not many left. And actually one of the scientifically proven interventions is to spawn oysters and create fake oyster corals that will break up the power of the waves or any water surges. So there are environmentally, like again, looking at nature and the way nature solves problems, and over time and being able to replicate that. There's this 1 million oyster project where they're literally teaching kids how to spawn oysters. That would be a fun school holiday project, wouldn't it? So I feel like we have to think. You may enjoy the cynicism. I do too. I drink whiskey to cope with that. But outside of that, I know one thing to be true, and that is nobody knows what the future is, right? I could pay a $5 tarot reader in New York Central Park area to tell me the future. But I trust her or him as much as I trust any politician or any futurist, no offense, because ultimately nobody knows what the future is. It's made up of our actions today. So we could have AI robots, but if people don't buy into it, like they didn't buy into Google Glasses, which were a terrible idea, then we don't end up with them. So I don't know. I feel like climate change, who knows? The Montreal Protocol, when I was 5, I remember being so scared that we were going to die from being burnt to death because of the hole in the ozone layer, and that is not the case. So I think that the future is made up of what we choose to invest in today. So, you know.
Can I be a little more?
It's all up to us.
I think, look, what you're saying is right. But there is a physics about, particularly the sea level rise, there's a certain amount that's already built in. That the carbon lasts a certain amount in the atmosphere, the Earth is going to continue warming for a while. And that whole study from the IPCC was saying we can hold the world to 1.5 degrees if we do dramatic changes in our system.
But we won't. We're not going to do that.
It depends on the time of day and whether I've had a drink,
wanna watch
whether I agree with you.
Us, look, we all are liberal, well-educated, coastal
elites. Yes.
elites.
But
We are not the people in the middle who dump their trash out of the car window as they drive down the highway. I mean,
we do that too. But anyways, I think, but we do, as I said before, there's some things that are built in that we're going to have to, I think, accept. I think things like coral are in trouble. And I do think, look, I grew up in South Florida. I was born down in South Florida. I don't think Miami is inhabitable in another generation or two. I don't. I think it's built. I think we're gonna see a retreat from some of the cities, and there's going to need to be organizational help, and it's going to cost an unbelievable amount of money, and it's going to cause disruption. And we're the richest country. We can maybe handle it. I don't know what happens in Bangladesh when 100 million people have to move away from the coast. There's going to be things happening that we're not ready for, and we have to start to prepare. That doesn't mean that we can just adapt. That means we also have to accelerate as fast as we can away from carbon so this doesn't get worse.
So what does that mean in terms of city design and city planning? Does anyone talk about this, like how to climate-proof our cities?
There is talk.
Yeah, there's talk. Our municipal officials, again, they're taking the lead on these kinds of topics, and it really is about the financial impact that these systems are having on city planning, on cities. You talk about Miami Beach, for example, having to invest billions of dollars in their infrastructure because of sea level rise. You can ride down 10 years ago and the streets were being flooded anytime high rise occurred. And now they haven't addressed it, that it's going to be a long-term solution, but at least they identified it. They had a municipal bond issue approved, and the citizens have made a decision that they want to reinvest and replan their communities. And they're not waiting, again, for any other level of government to do that. They are taking the lead themselves. And this is happening all over America.
But how do you build, how do you design green space and altitudes and apartments and, you know what I mean? Like when people expand a city or design a planned suburb, are people thinking about that?
I think they're starting to now. I think Hurricane Harvey was a big wake-up call. I mean, because you could see in the flooding of Houston how much of that, I mean, first of all, there was just absolutely epic record-setting rain, but then a lot of the flooding could also be attributed to the fact that Houston is one big paved area, that they paved in the green sponge areas of the city. And so I think that concept really got across then, and people are, China has a program they call Sponge Cities, which is basically adapting planning for extreme rains. If you plan areas, I think in Holland also they build areas that can function as a parking lot, but they can also function as a holding tank for extreme amounts of water. So you can, that's one example. Sorry.
But so on the point, you're essentially talking about bringing back in natural riparian, city riparian strips, right? Like this idea of using nature as a defense mechanism. I mean, we know that where mangroves have been removed on the coastline, that any kind of storm surges will affect the coastline in a way more significant way because, again, there isn't something to disperse the power of the storm. Right. So think of like the city needs to be designed with not just the occupant's health in mind, but also the long-term kind of like feasibility. And that's why bringing nature back into cities, not only in this spongy idea, but also literally as an air filter and knowing
as a cooling.
Yes, as a cooling
device
agent too.
Yes, right.
And I mean, we can look at the way in which we, like, again, back to legislation and city-based legislation or encouragement, incentivizing buildings that are also serviced as food, like vertical gardens. There's some beautiful examples around the world of these like draping plant like palaces that are buildings that people live in. They have less heating and cooling costs because they have these like green facades that protect them from the sunlight. It's like incredible. And you drive or walk past it and you go, oh, I want to live in that building. Like who wants to live in a concrete block or a glass tower? You know, humans, believe it or not, do have a very strong affinity with nature. And there's a lot of strong science now about the cognitive benefits of seeing nature in your day. There's so much research that essentially says that you can focus longer, you feel better, that loneliness problem goes away if you are interacting with something that is green, that is a different shade of the industrial world. And this all sounds wishy-washy, but just go look it up. There's a lot of research on this now. It's not like someone wanting to prove a point. It's really genuinely feeding into a lot of the planning and the long-term planning of the feasibility of our cities. So, and all of these can be retrofitted. You can pull up a parking lot and put in a park.
Exactly.
You could have a parking lot. In my head, that was really funny until I said it.
Well, look what's happened
but
in
I
New
do
York,
think
right?
that
Times Square.
Oh, yeah,
They've
right.
taken cities that have taken out car areas. The traffic's not gotten worse in many
It's
examples.
astonishing.
It's
astonishing.
It is.
Who had the guts to try that? You know what he's talking about? Times Square
can
used
walk.
to have all these major avenues. It used to be a traffic snarl. So some mayor just said, you know what? No cars. No cars in Times Square. It's all just for walking. And they set up restaurant chairs and tables in the middle of what used to be the road. And everyone's like, that's going to kill our business. That's going to clog the avenues on either side.
It didn't.
It didn't. Everybody loves it.
There's a classic story similar to that in Amsterdam where they took out traffic lights to see if it increased or decreased the accidents. No accidents. And what they found was that when people come up to a traffic light, what's the first thing you do at a traffic light? Like tune out, basically.
Pull out your phone.
Right, yeah, pull out your phone, think about dinner. You're like, just waiting for the world to tell me what to do next. Oh, yep, waiting for the red to go green. That's what happens. So your brain basically just goes, I'm out of here. Whereas if there's no traffic light, brain goes, well, let's not get killed. And so what they found was that the bikes, the pedestrians, and the cars made eye contact.
Yeah.
And when you make eye contact, you're nicer. So actually the car drivers started becoming extremely nice to the bike riders, and they'd be like, oh no, you go, oh no, you go. And so they found that the safety increased dramatically, and they started now taking out traffic lights, the brain-numbing traffic lights in lots of places. It's crazy. You put in a roundabout, you have completely different outcomes to traffic lights.
You know what? It's the bike helmet phenomenon. Statistically, once they started mandating bike helmets, bike accidents shot through the roof because people felt invulnerable. They were no longer careful.
You know, in Australia, a bike helmet is called a stack hat because you wear it when you stack, when you fall off your bike.
You only put it on when you fall.
We have very funny ways of explaining things, yeah.
But David, I do think, you know, for city leaders, we have to, as we plan, balance for the environment and the people and the economy.
That's called sustainability.
Yes.
They're the three things.
I have to tell you, I grew up in rural Florida around Lake Okeechobee, Everglades restoration. All my life has been dealing with that issue. Yeah, you may try to retrofit and bring the water back and create the Everglades of the 1900s. But I can tell you, the community that I grew up in, it would be flooded. And what about the people? And most of them are African American, Latino, poor. And I don't think that part, it can't be forgotten. And so part of what I push is that whole sustainability piece, getting in the right place, the right time, and the right program for the right community, because one size plan does not fit all, and as it relates to a sustainability effort. And as we look at what's happening in American cities, you know, all of those amazing designs of environmental sustainability and program designs, but I can tell you that there are communities that don't have a voice, that are forgotten. And again, I come to symposiums and summits to challenge people, not to hear myself talk. I can do that. Well, I would say my wife is here. She listens to me. She doesn't listen to me either. But I think in this room, let's find the issue or policy initiative that we can push that really is going to take in consideration the environment, the people, and the economy. It's out there, and I do believe we can do that. Right now, the public-private partnership is not as strong as it could be around these kinds of issues. Historically, the public officials would design programs, and then they just force it on the private sector. Now what has to happen is that good public policy is when the public and private designs it together and then it's implemented. Otherwise, it's just another document. So I do think that real urban planning, real design may not be the Houston example, because when I was in grad school in urban planning, they didn't use Houston as an example of urban planning.
No.
Probably still don't.
Right.
Still don't. They use a lot of the communities out of Oregon, for example. My professor used that. So I just hope that, again, we look at it comprehensively and consider all of the facets, the people part of it especially.
So I'm taking your job. But in your experience then, what can we do to bring in that equity piece, right? The equitable access to space, because there's a lot of design in cities to design out people who are poor or not desired by certain aspects. There's gated parks, there's spikes to stop homelessness, and this hostile architecture is becoming more common now in affluent areas to design out the undesirable. And unfortunately, unless you solve social problems, then you just basically deflect or defer that. So I'm just interested, do you have any insights into what can help overcome this equity issue that you're discussing?
Well, I can tell you, if we could solve that on this panel, we'd do the impossible, not impossible. I think that it's going to be uncomfortable first. Let's recognize that. We got to acknowledge that we have planned out populations of people. I moved from West Palm to Washington, D.C. I intentionally identified a black community that I wanted to live in because I just wanted to be comfortable. I didn't want to have to go through the drama of any police issues. So I thought that I'd do that. 5 years has gone by, and probably 50% of the black community is gone, and it is majority white now. And so displacement is occurring in especially urban cities. I think that city leaders have got to partner with private developers and planners to be able to figure out how you not push people out. I think that we have to create schools that are viable for everyone in communities, because no matter whether you're African American, white, or any other culture, the first thing you want is a place where your kids can go to a good school. And what we see with the young population now, they're moving into the urban parts of the cities until they get married, until they decide that they want to have kids. Then they go to the suburbs and leave those communities behind. So it's a long way of saying, I don't have the answer, but we have to address it because it is an issue.
Well, you had this case in New York with the horrible thing to refer to, but the poor doors.
Yes.
Which was, if you're not familiar, it was where big developers were building in separate doors in the back of buildings for the low socioeconomic tenants that they had to design for. It's quite an inequitable thing, and it's now illegal in New York, but it's still, these tactics are tactics that are utilized to try and create this desirability for certain people and not for others. And this is a bigger cultural conversation about right to space and access and the equity piece, I think, is, sustainability doesn't work if you don't have happy people. Happy people don't treat the planet in good ways, so.
And resilient communities are planned for the entire community. Sustainable communities are planned for the entire community. And I'm blessed and can live but there are populations as we design sustainable communities, as we design, that we can create resiliency for them as well.
Well, I have what I think is a related question. It's so echoey up here. This might be stomping out what you just said, but I'm concerned. I'm wondering what the demographic effects and the population effects of wealth disparity are in this country as the middle class disappears. What does that do to cities, to density, to rural areas? What's the net effect?
Well, one thing that's happening is the suburban poverty is moving to the suburbs.
Yep.
It's happened in, I spent a few days in Atlanta for this piece I was working on, and that's a huge trend there of, long time ago, the whites moved out to the suburbs. Now some of the younger ones are coming back, and minorities are being forced out into
well, you've seen that the big
more
cities
distant
that
areas.
have priced out the working class, right? San Francisco, Seattle, New York, like that.
Right.
The working class, and it's partly the tech. In the Bay Area, it's the tech community, but they've priced out so nobody people have to commute an almost impossible distance to come in and be they can't get waiters in restaurants in some of these communities because there's no place they can live. So there's, and sometimes you come back to, again, what companies' role in society. I think it's Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn was very much in favor of a bill that was being proposed for taxing the big rich tech companies to help build housing, to help bring in affordable housing, and some of the other tech companies just fought it.
Yeah, that
crazy,
didn't go over
right?
well.
It didn't go over well. In Seattle, Amazon and Bezos kind of fought it. He's at the time when he was fighting this, he was worth $160 billion. So I think the perspective, it doesn't look good.
No.
It's like guillotines come out in these moments, in history. And I think these companies are starting to realize it's pretty hard if you can't populate the working class and even some of the tech class because they can't live there. So I don't know what the solution to this is, but it's clearly we're pricing people out. And the disparity is there, but I think the companies that have stepped forward to say, we're part of this community, and say, fine, tax us, or I think Microsoft just committed something like $500 million to some kind of affordable housing thing. But again, it comes back to business and government. We need both.
Yeah.
Right? It can't just be waiting for the companies to say, companies can't build public housing, that shouldn't be their job. But they can support the legislation that would allow it.
Well, speaking of technology, what are the effects of upcoming technologies on cities? Self-driving cars are going to have some huge effect. Yeah. We talk about the smart grids, AI, robots displacing workers. What effects will those have?
Self-driving cars, I think, are huge, and I think it completely hangs in the balance now. If it goes the way that the first cars went, then they're going to be owned privately, and they're going to contribute to they're going to blow cities to smithereens, and they're going to atomize us further. You're going to have people driving 2 hours in their incredibly comfortable robotic cars, maybe continuing to sleep, you could live anywhere. I tell you, and beyond self-driving cars, that's not the end of it. For this piece, I went to one of there are numerous companies developing self-flying planes.
Oh, yeah.
Just
And
about to say, we're living in the Jetsons.
Yes, it's
finally there.
fantastic. Oh, I went to visit one manufacturer, a manufacturer called Kitty Hawk. It's run by people who came from Google, but it's owned by Larry Page, but it's not Google. And they, they have these cute little things that are going to be drone. They're flying now in New Zealand. They're testing them there, and they're going to be taxis. And the president of the company, told me that he saw these things operating within the decade. And I said, well, what would the first market? He said, well, like you'd arrive at LAX and they would fly designated routes downtown.
Nothing could go wrong
Fly
with
right
that.
over the traffic. And it's going to be cheap. He says it's going to be, maybe 50% more than Uber Black. Not a helicopter, cheap. And I said, well, gosh, so how many you imagine there are going to be in LA? He said, oh, thousands. And I said, well, what's that going to be like?
It's going to be like Blade Runner.
What's the world going to be like when you unleash this amazing new technology?
It's going to be like all those, the bird scooters, just like abandoned
Exactly.
carelessly in the middle of the street, because it's called Tragedy of the Commons, right?
Right.
The moment you don't have a human to make you behave like an adult human, right? Because humans do things differently when there are other humans around
Right.
versus when they're by themselves. And you know what I'm talking about,
Right.
okay? I think that what I find fascinating about the tech boom, the future is all technologically advanced, which it will be, of course, but I think of my, my first job, which was like waitressing. And I got myself through college. I made my own independent life choices because I had a crappy job and got paid too little. But I had that job because that job was needed. And I think a lot of us learn very valuable life skills. And now as an entrepreneur, I don't hire people who haven't had a crappy job, because it means they get out of bed in the morning and they do something and they can be accountable. And so what happens is, if you take away some of those early job starter life skill experience opportunities, like working in a cafe or bar or serving people in a supermarket, which is where we're automating the quickest, so the iPads that do the ordering, or those machines that they talk to you like, put your bag on there, and I'm like, oh, I hate you. Beep. I always think I never wanted to be a checkout person. Beep, every time I do it myself. This is taking away this generation and future generations' ability to get their foot in the door from a professional perspective. Yeah. So I feel that there's some situations we're going to later go, maybe we should bring back these jobs, because otherwise a lot of teenagers with a lot of time on their hands.
I think that those horses
I agree with you.
have left the stable. I mean, automation, there's no expert in the world who does not say that the first jobs to go are the entry-level, repetitive waiter, checkout counter, box unloader. Our government is predicting by 2030 47% job displacement by robotics and automation. Now, that doesn't mean 47% employment necessarily. It just means any more than in 1898, 40% of Americans were farmers. And if you went up to a farmer and said, what do you think they'll be doing 100 years from now? He wouldn't have said search engine optimization and apps. And we don't know what we'll be doing, but it won't be that.
I like that concept that you shared, though, about we are in charge of designing that city for the future, and let's be thoughtful as to that's what I got from what you shared. Let's be thoughtful about what we want our cities and our country to be, and how do we want to use technology? Do we want the Jetsons flying and all of those things? We have a choice.
We do.
And I think
choice.
we get to, and I'm not using this term in a negative way, but we get the technology people all at a conference, and then they say, oh my God, it's going to be crazy. You're going to see drones flying through here instead of birds trapped in the chandelier. You're going to see this happening, and we buy into that. Well, maybe we shouldn't
don't have to
buy into that.
Well, the tech community isn't so good about thinking about repercussions.
No.
Facebook was not predicted to help bring down democracy. I mean, that's not what it was supposed to.
It's supposed to get you laid, actually.
No, it was supposed to. That's right. It was.
what
It was
set
just
up
supposed to
for.
connect you. That's what he was. I mean, Zuckerberg needed help, and but I think. Come on, he's not a. He's a weird dude.
Just stop now. Stop.
No,
stop.
he's a weird dude.
Stop.
Wait, oh, is he listening?
Let's not forget that Facebook started out as a Mark Zuckerberg website called Hot or Not,
Yes.
where the point was to rate the hotness
Yeah.
of girls.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a good guy.
Yeah.
So, but just the unexpected consequences of technology is we're so bad at this over and over again. And I think this the autonomous vehicle, yeah, you're going to allow some people to move further away. We could end up creating much more material use, much more energy use if we're not careful.
I have a great
you know?
example of unintended consequences. I collect them because I'm not on Facebook that much. Anyway, so I collect unintended consequences. My favorite is radium. Who knows what radium is?
X-ray?
What is it?
It's a
It's an element.
It's an element that kills you, right? Like Marie Curie discovered it. They won the Nobel Prize in Physics. Their notebooks are still radioactive because radium is radium isotopes. It's dangerous, but it glows in the dark. So of course, what do you think humans did as soon as they discovered radium? What did we do with radium?
Glow-in-the-dark stickers.
Oh my gosh, we put it in everything. Beauty products, it was the life elixir in the 1920s. In fact, if you go to eBay, you can still buy advertisements and some of the water purifiers that you put radium in overnight and got a life support system in the morning.
Nice.
No joke, if you look at some of these advertisements, beauty products, so you would glow. There were all these girls who died from painting the faces of watches. They were called the watch girls, I think, about 150 of them. They painted the radium right onto the watches there. So there's a lot of, it was like 20 years, 25 years before they were like, oh,
Right, that's bad.
right, gives you cancer and kills you immediately. Johnson & Johnson, talcum powder. I'm just going to leave that there. But ultimately, like, the law of unintended consequences is rife in human evolution. And to this point, I think it's about efficiency and the fact that we're always trying to be more efficient. And efficiency is great on some respects, but it's also terrible in others because you miss things and you don't do the due diligence to make sure that we're not making tomorrow's problems today.
Yeah.
And I think technology gives us the opportunity to do infinite things, but it also gives us the opportunity to destroy ourselves. So, you know, like radium.
If I can just add one, so that we don't sound too anti-tech here, I think autonomous vehicles, there's a huge opportunity there. They could be used to make amazing public transit systems that will be cheap enough that we can start to knit together the sprawling cities we've built. Because Atlanta and its suburbs, MARTA has an ambitious subway plan that's going to, one line out 20 miles maybe by 2040. Subways are too expensive. But with autonomous buses, and the Chinese are building those already too, that could be cheap enough that you could envision much more ubiquitous public transit, and you could start to sort of pull back some of the scattering of our cities that we did in the 20th century.
Well, I'll just say that technology, smart cities, every major city in America claims that they are a smart city using technology. And if you want to get reelected, you better say you are a smart city that's leading. So let's start with that. But the other piece of it is that we are using data to make decisions. And the connectivity part of that to help leaders to make good decisions about the parks, what time of the day is somebody using the parks, the red lights data, data on collection of every sort is being used by public officials. Instead of someone saying, the park is never being used, you can actually use data to make decisions that are accurate. And we're seeing that more and more from city leaders throughout America, that they have to be that smart city. Again, there are cities that are certain sizes and regions that are being left behind in that run for the technological smart city. And it is based upon, the Midwest is a difference than the Northeast in terms of investment and access. The West region is known as Silicon Valley or technology world. But again, it's still parts of and sizes of communities are not at the same rate.
Andrew, you referenced millennials and Generation Z and indicated that they have, I mean, their hearts are in the right place. They believe in working for companies that mean something and have values, not just making money. And at first I was tempted to draw hope from this, like, oh, good, the incoming generation is going to be smarter than the old one. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. Isn't that just the natural cycle of life, that we're all young and idealistic when we're young, and then we calcify and grow more conservative as we get old?
Are you just telling your own life story?
No. I'm still young and idealistic.
There's always some of that, but I think and if you kind of look at the question that they're really answering, and even now look at what Larry Fink from BlackRock is saying, it's getting rid of the idea that there's a trade-off in this entire conversation, that if you go down sustainability path, it must cost you more money. And in fact, this generation seems to have a clearer view of what Larry Fink is now saying, which is if you want to create value as a business, you have to have your story, you have to have your purpose, you have to think about the long term, because basically we went down a 30, 40-year path of quarterly shareholder return being the only metric. And you make poor decisions when you do that. Sometimes you make good ones, but you mostly make poor decisions because you'll never invest in the longer term. And I just think this idea that there's a trade-off is dying more with this generation. So I don't think it's an idealism. It's that in plenty of sectors, those companies that do have a purpose, they're the ones growing the fastest. They're the ones that are getting the most customers. And it's a virtuous circle there. Those millennials are buying from those companies. They're going to work for them. So I think the trade-off idea is dying, and that's a good thing. And so I don't think the millennials are going to change necessarily. I think, in fact, when I talk to CEOs or executives who have kind of come around on this stuff, it's often because the millennials have talked to them, and that means like literally their own children. I hear that story a lot. Executives say, yeah, their kids are like, what are you doing? Right? What are you about?
I just want to make one point as on like the cusp of the millennial generation.
You're just barely.
Yeah, barely. It's like, it's not all our responsibility to save the world. I just want to put that out there.
No, it's Gen Z.
There's a lot of people who are all like, the millennials will do it for us. It's like, hang on a second. We didn't make the mess. You clean up your mess. I think everybody has the capacity to make change. And the people who hold most of the power and the resources right now are the ones who are deflecting responsibility to other generations, and they're going to still live a long time. So like, if you're still living, you need to be responsible for the outcomes of your actions, and there's always time to make change and to revolutionize the way we do business and to be more equitable in the way we engage with our communities. Like, these are not fluffy things. These are real, human, important, valuable things that everyone should be responsible for, Like, everyone needs to care about the planet, or they can all go move to Mars, which, from what I heard, doesn't have oxygen. So see how that goes.
Leyla for president.
They don't let you if you're not American. I'm Australian.
So you guys aren't discouraged by the direction our country is going in terms of social issues, environmental issues, progress?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not. We're not saying. I hope we're not saying that. But the other option is to just check out,
Right.
and
True.
we're not willing to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're not willing to do that.
No, we're fighting.
I think I do think that it has been tough in terms of our city leaders keeping our cities together, because some of the things that you see, the two examples that you showed on the screen, really does hit home. I mean, because America is the place where no matter what, you're supposed to go to grad school and college and act and talk a certain way, and you should not have experienced what Starbucks experienced just because.
Right.
Just because. And we look at our environment and we see things being degraded. The number of hurricanes, the wildfires, all of those things, and we gotta say to ourselves, shouldn't we step up and take responsibility for that and not just sit at home and complain about nothing is happening?
Right. Well, that goes back to the discussion before about how do you make sure that the voices are heard, the voices in the communities. What I wanted to say to that was political action. Run for your local planning and zoning commission, your school board, your town council. I ran and joined my town legislature a year and a few months ago, and it's incredibly minutia, but it's also like decisions that matter for my community and my schools where my kids are at. And, you know, people, if they want their voice to be a part of that conversation, they actually have to have a seat at the table, and they have to vote, right? Like, and so if you want a different outcome, and yes, I want a different outcome. I know this might be a shock. I'm not happy with the leadership decisions going on right now. The destruction of the EPA from within is horrific, and from every dimension, health, economy, it makes no sense. There is no good business in a world that can just dump everything in every river they want. This is what we decided in the early 70s, run entirely by Republican administrations.
Yep. Who created the EPA.
Nixon created all of it. Bush Sr. signed the renewed Clean Air Act. This used to be completely bipartisan, that you want clean air and water. We're in a very weird place right now, and I hope that it turns out that legally they can't destroy these laws as fast as they'd like. They're just not enforcing them. And as soon as we change back, I hope, who's in power and who controls the EPA, we will start enforcing those laws again. And I truly believe, you know, thank you. And I believe it's good for business, right? It's not good for the bad guys. It's good for everybody else.
Yeah.
Agree.
That seems logical to me.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, Clarence, Leyla, Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Please keep fighting. Keep fighting, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Good meeting you.
Yeah.
Nice job.